So we've seen equities take a massive hit, but shockingly, we're starting to see an asset trading non-correlated. So this is something that we have discussed at some points when we're talking about the price of Chia or Bitcoin, that all things seem to be trading in a very correlated fashion. But gold is no longer trading in a correlated fashion. We have seen the market go down substantively, while gold remains resilient or goes up in the face of everything else going down. We've got something a brewing here. Lucas, you think you might have an answer for what it is. What is going on with gold? Why is it bucking the trend of the rest of the correlated market?
Great question. We did a show a couple of weeks ago because I had seen news on my Twitter feed of gold bugs who were talking about the things that were happening in London and the London Bullion Market Association and the COMEX in New York City here in the United States, and interesting things that were going on with the flows of gold. And I always keep an eye on gold. I'm not a traditional gold bug. I find the politics of central banking to be very interesting, and gold has a long tradition in being the being what countries hold to settle their accounts.
The unit of settlement. This is going back to the old Bretton Woods and all the rest of the stuff that we frequently talk about on this show as being one of the defining moments in the history of the world, in the way that the economic interplay has really fashioned itself. The gold was central to France and the United States having its first big disagreement.
Absolutely. Well, maybe not their first big disagreement, but a lasting one, and the one that has defined their relationship since World War II.
Right. I'm saying like in the modern era, right? Of course, we have like going back. Yeah, that's too far to go back.
Well, I'm sure Lafayette pissed off Benjamin Franklin at some point, but maybe we should set the stage with what was happening at Bretton Woods before we go into this. So
let's not go too far back. I think it's fun to talk right now. So I mean, like, let's ground it a little bit, because the bullion market is kind of going a little haywire right now because a lot of physical delivery is being demanded, right? Isn't that
so? Yes, and so what's happening right now? The bullion market is haywire. They are their settlement times of a couple of days have been stretched out to months, to God knows how, to God knows if the physical delivery could ever be taken for the paper promises that have been made in the London bullion market.
Right, because it used to be that the time to fulfill an order was more about, well, we have to actually go put our hands on it, put it in a box, send it out to you, that kind of stuff. But now it's like, well, we got to wait for the mine to go dig it out of the ground and refine it or something, right? The vault is empty.
Well, depending on who you ask, like some of the participants, the gold sellers in the LBMA are singing a song about gold is heavy and it's hard to move around. But whenever you look and say, is it so hard that it takes 60 days to get somewhere? We also need to understand the more traditional practices of what goes on in the London Bullion Market Association and the COMEX. The COMEX is an exchange. The LBMA is a union, a cartel. It is rules that are established for a bunch of different gold sellers. And this actually bears out, I think, most importantly in the price, the setting of the time of the price of gold. So in the LBMA, the price is set at the current price, and the delivery time is incidental if you wish to take delivery of gold, because most of the time those who were engaging in the gold market with the LBMA were doing so on speculative grounds and didn't necessarily need to take possession of the gold. And so instead they would cash out before the gold was actually physically moved around.
Right. And this is a frequent thing in the whole commodities market, is that people will speculate on the price. They'll say, well, frozen concentrated orange juice, is going to have a bad time this year because it was a really good season in Florida, and so there's a lot of it, and so the price is going to go down. And sometimes this is famously blown up in the face of traders who forgot to close out their position and then suddenly found a truck or a barge full of grain in front of their house, because taking delivery of commodities is not the most common thing.
Well, and this is also why I sort of wanted to go back to the Bretton Woods, but I'll quickly insert this here. This phenomenon, especially with gold, is a creation of the central banks of the world. If you have a central bank and you have a large amount of gold in a vault, you are going to have the phenomenon of people who want to get in on that market and have some and be moving it around. And two, you also have gold sitting there for long periods of time. So in the 40s, FDR's treasury there are actually memos that talk about, we don't we have problems with the availability of gold, and not only that, the United States Treasury has seized all the gold of Americans in America. How about we set up some alternative so that people can still play and speculate about gold, but it also is incentivizing them or moving them away from taking actual custody of gold. And so that's one half of how this market gets created. There's another half too, in which, again, central banks sit on their stores of gold for quite some time, and if they are settling out with other countries, and all the gold is held by, say, I don't know, the Federal Reserve in New York City or the Bank of England in London, then gold is sitting there, and promises and games can be stacked atop it, so to speak. So, for instance,
Well,
when
you can see how if like there's just a couple of places to custody the gold, especially if it's in some vault that's very secure. What is the point of taking delivery and then just turning around and giving it back to the custodian? It's easier just to trade the slip of paper and say, yeah, that pile over there was yours, and now this pile over here is mine, and it's easy to settle it up, and that works until somebody starts playing games, I suppose, and we're back into the whole problem of fractional reserve banking, right?
absolutely, but it, giving the chance for treasuries for anyone who's holding gold to make money on contracts that have a smaller settlement window of the contract of the sovereign bank and the custodian of the gold, is too ripe an opportunity for them to turn down. So recently I saw that Argentina had shipped all of their gold to London, and I thought, how interesting. I wonder what the period of contract that they set up for that and what their return on it was. Because Argentina, why would they ship their gold to London? Well, they probably have a 50-year or God knows how long contract, that they'll take it back in the future, and they're being paid some amount for depositing it in the London Bank. And then the London Bank will turn around and say, oh, as long as we can deliver this gold at this time in the future, then we can do other things with it in the meantime. And this is why the LBMA is in London.
This seems to me like the traditional form of staking, right? So Argentina says, yep, you hang on to our gold for some period of time, we'll earn a rate of return. They're going to stake their gold, and in the meantime these guys are supposed to be holding on to it and doing something, and what, they're selling it off, or we're setting up the next Celsius or something here, right?
Yes, that's exactly what's happening. And
Sounds like Argentina is about to get rooked.
I think it's possible that we're going to find out that there are many countries who have gold reserves on their books, but may not be able to come up with that gold. And this is why I think the amount of gold that's been flowing into the United States is so interesting. Now, a couple of other things that most people probably generally know. The United States has not audited our gold reserves in some time, not at Fort Knox, not in Denver, not at the Federal Reserve, not in the other Federal Reserve banks. And and so if any gold was lost at some time, and this is occurring, if this is the de facto way that countries play and pretend that gold is on their books, then you can see part of the problems that led to maybe going to a different system in the era of Bretton Woods. But also part of the reason that we moved to the system in the time of Bretton Woods, and we had a discussion yesterday or earlier today about the Lend-Lease Act and about the outsized about the fact that the United States had amassed, I think, 80% of the gold reserves in the world at the time. So gold was not distributed evenly enough amongst the countries of the world to provide liquidity for countries to be able to settle out. And the United, the London we call the pound, short for the pound sterling. Leading into the world wars, there had been a bimetal sort of trade hegemonies throughout the world. The Americans and other countries were on gold, but Britain and their empire had moved to silver, and this is why they had the pound sterling. And the United States was eager, and part of the reason that we abused the what not abused, but why we took advantage, I should say, of the Lend-Lease Act and the things that we had lent Britain was to force them back into the gold standard. But in doing so, we played a trick on them. And in the contracts of Bretton Woods, we said a gold convertible currency, all the time that they were establishing all of these rates and the rules for getting into the Bretton Woods system. It was gold convertible currency. At the very last minute, they changed the gold convertible currency to dollar, and this put the United States in control of the world exchange system going forward. And I think this is also
because there's essentially two ways to do this kind of stuff. You have a contract. In the contract, you can say, I will do services or deliver you such and such goods, and I want to be paid a certain amount in dollars. There's other ways that you could spec a contract. One might be to say, I will do XYZ services or deliver you these goods. In exchange, I want to be paid in gold. Now, there is also a variant here. You could say, I want to be paid a certain amount of gold ounces, or I want to be paid a certain amount of dollars that is to be delivered in ounces of gold. So there's some variance here, right, as far as to how things can actually be priced and how these contracts can be written.
Absolutely. And you absolutely put your finger on the subtle change that was made from going into Bretton Woods and coming out of Bretton Woods. Because everyone says, oh, we were on the gold standard before and we were on the gold standard afterwards. But the difference was, and this is was that the gold standard going into Bretton Woods was denominated in the weight of gold. And coming out of Bretton Woods, it was denominated in the price of gold. And this was the gold exchange standard. And the one currency that was put on par, or maybe even put beneath and underpinning and denominating the price of gold, was the United States dollar. And this gave the United States the ability to abuse the amount of dollars that we had created, as opposed to what our gold reserves were. And that's what the United States did. I mean, I think that we had 18,000 tons of gold coming out of World War II, and up until 1970, we gradually paid out 10,000 of those tons of gold to various countries in the world. We got down to 8,000, and Nixon, Nixon froze as the French were sending warships to collect their gold, and said, "Oh, we can't pay out the rest of these dollars that we've disseminated throughout the world in gold." And that was the Nixon shock, and the move over to a commodity-based currency. And at that time, the countries of the world did not want to have a discussion about what new rules were going to be forthcoming, and that the United States had lied about how many dollars that they had created. And so everybody sort of played along. And this is whenever the United States comes up with the sort of the payoff to the governments or the ruling class of various countries in the world to continue to participate in this system, and to, we will send corporations to invest in your country as long as you invest money into those corporations, and setting up that sort of system. So part of the problem that the United States saddled itself with whenever it became a place that could produce dollars that nobody else could produce is that we removed the ability to or the incentives to devalue our currency. And this is when I talk about, oh, we've driven manufacturing out of the United States, we have in so many ways. And this is part of the globalization trends that we have seen. Why? Because other places don't produce dollars, and they lag behind us in the price level and the supply level of those dollars. So we can pay people in China and India to do things at a much lower rate than here in the United States.
And I think that's an important thing to think about, as how the US has been operating. Because of the agreements that were put in place, we essentially had this mine that nobody else had, because we could produce dollars, and the world had a desire and an appetite for dollars. And so it was cheaper for us to pay other people to do stuff for us rather than to do it ourselves, because we had this entire world economic system which ran on dollars. It was the reserve currency, it was what things were priced in. So every country of the world had some appetite for dollars, and we were the only dealer in town. Everybody was hooked on this thing. And so what a surprise that all our natural industries got driven out, because it was way cheaper to outsource it to somebody else, because we had this never-ending bucket of dollars to dole out to pay for stuff.
And this, bringing it back into the future here with the Trump administration, I think this is where especially JD Vance is a very interesting selection as the vice president of the United States. He is from a poor Appalachia town, and he wrote a book about these very effects that the global exchange or the gold exchange standard system was having on the United States. And so we need to bear in mind that at least JD Vance understands these effects implicitly. And not only that, but that is the driving force of why he entered politics, and the issue that he wanted to correct. And I think we should also understand why the system was created. When Harry Dexter White created the Bretton Woods system, and Maynard Keynes came up with the idea from Britain even to begin with, they understood that being like solely dependent on how much gold that you had limited countries to ability to respond to liquidity and fluctuations in the economic realities of their countries. And so they wanted to give these various countries the ability to devalue their currency so that they could attract more foreign investment, and that they could speed up the wheel. We're on a 1-to-1 dollar versus the pound system, but we're lagging in our economy here in the United States. Well, let's devalue the dollar and say it's 3/4 to 1 on the pound sterling. That will bring British investment here. And whenever the United States adopted that currency as the denominator, we robbed ourselves of the ability to devalue the dollar. So the $100,000 haha question or $400,000 question for politicians since 1971 in America is, how do you devalue the United States dollar? And now to bear that in mind as we look to massive gold flows, and when I say massive gold flows coming into the United States, I believe the number, and I wish I had double checked before this, but I've had a lot on my plate. But I think I know it's more than 1,000 tons. I think it may be close to 2,000 tons in the last month have flowed from the exchanges into the United States. And the United States already ostensibly, we don't have audits on these, but we can assume that, or hope that that it's fairly close to true, that the United States has already 8,000 tons of gold in its holdings in Fort Knox and the various other banks. So
I'm a little bit curious as to how this is kept track of. I imagine there's somebody at the ports that are saying, "What's in this tanker?" And they say, "Well, there's bullion in them containers."
well,
That how
because
it goes, or how do they keep track of this kind of a thing? I'm kind of curious if you know.
so well, partially, and it's very hard to keep track of. But partially through the COMEX, because the COMEX is an exchange and there are reporting requirements for it. So um, we've seen some of, I guess that's the best that I can answer that, and because the physical deliveries are bringing the gold here into the United States. So great question. I wish that we knew more, and this is part of why I also have some assumptions about what's going to happen in the future. So one, we do know that gold and massive amounts, thousands of tons of gold are coming into the United States. And two, that the United States has mediocre, moderate, 8,000 tons of gold. I think that may put us still first in the world. But again, we don't have great reporting numbers from Saudi Arabia, from India, from China, from Russia. Because why would they necessarily admit to what their true gold holdings are if the world denominator is dollars? And the United, everyone was willing to play along with the dollar system until the United States started engaging in these sanctions. And the sanctions are part of what have killed everyone's appetite for continuing to use the dollar and to pretend that there was some sort of gold holdings behind.
So it's this list that we would really call into question, because we note the absence of particular countries, and we'd speculate that it is not an accurate representation because there are noticeable omissions to this list, or it seems like they are not accurately reported.
Yes, and we also know that some it's more politically popular for some of these countries to be purchasing gold, and so we need it. We need a better system for verifying what the gold holdings, the actual gold holdings and the contracts that are laid out on the reserves of these various countries, and that's again where I turn to. The Donald Trump and Republicans have, since Donald Trump and even before, since he came into office, have made a lot of noise about NATO and the UN. But it's very interesting to me that while they talk about these global organizations, even the World Health Organization, the ICC, et cetera, I haven't heard any bad mouthing about the World Bank or the IMF. And the World Bank and the IMF were the institutions that were created by the Bretton Woods system to spread dollars throughout the world. As essentially, dollars were to be held, or whatever the global reserve currency was to be held in the World Bank. And according to the amount of investment that was put into the World Bank and the holdings that were held by the World Bank, loans were to be made by the IMF. and so those institutions were to sort of function as the central bank and the treasury, um, for a world currency. So when I think about what might possibly happen, one if the United States is, and you also asked earlier in the episode, who is buying all of this gold? Well, if the Trump administration and the Secretary of the Treasury said, um, oh, there's one thing that we haven't mentioned too. The United States values its gold holdings at, I believe, $42 an ounce. And
Yeah,
yet
some
gold,
ridiculously abysmal low number doesn't make any sense because it hasn't been revalued since gold was trading at a much, much different exchange to dollars.
right. And so if the United States was to raise the evaluation of gold and of the dollar, it would ostensibly devalue the dollar. And that was fairly apparent to me, but I was wondering to myself, does the gold of the United States is held by the Treasury. Um, if the Treasury revalues the price of gold in dollars, it might legitimize the amount of dollars, or the production of more dollars, but who's the buyer? How does that get passed around? And then I thought, oh yeah, the United States made some institutions that it has an outsized amount of control over. There's only one nation that has veto power in the World Bank, and that's the United States. And the World Bank and the IMF are run on a basket of currencies now. Um, it would make a lot more sense if they ran on the gold reserves of the various countries of the world.
And so there's been some talk about this with respect to what should the value of the gold be, because if you do just some quick calculations on this, I think that gold, that 8,000 tons of gold is worth something on the order of $1 trillion, but that's only if it trades at the current spot price. But if there is no more gold to be had, then the spot price of gold might go up pretty substantively. Yes.
Absolutely right. And I think this is part of why, either the federal government or the bullion banks may have been alerted to the possible movements or the policy decisions that might be coming from the United States. Um, and it's also abusing.
Because at some point you have to ask yourself, why would I trade my gold for dollars if gold is going to be the unit of account? I'm like swapping away the thing that is going to be the unit of account for something that maybe there's substantively less demand for. Maybe just to settle out some old contracts that are still priced in dollars, or people who are, have some sort of an interest in dollars for some, lingering reason. Maybe it's treasuries or whatever. But if the world moves on, then there may be substantively less appetite for dollars, which could cause a price spiral upwards in the gold price, and that could even value that gold higher and higher as each day goes by.
Yes, and I think that we are going to see, the United States move to a mark to market price, so no peg on gold whatsoever, because the United States also is not, um, well, I don't know. I don't understand why the United States would both want to sell to retail customers, and I also, I don't think that the United States has obligations in, or I assume that the United States has met its obligations in gold that it needs to make, and by massively in legitimizing the increased supply of dollars, um, uh, the the
Well,
old
yeah,
loans that we have before that are
some of
denominated. Go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, some of the things we can think about are just like all those treasuries that have been sold off. So these treasuries say that they're going to be paid a fixed rate in dollars as interest. So I mean, that's one thing that's going to just have to continue, and that's where there was a lot of hand wringing about the debt. But if there's the old, I don't know, switcheroo, the Kansas City Shuffle, or whatever they call this sort of a situation where you sell somebody one thing and then you flip and everybody else wants something else, that obligation in dollars starts to maybe not look like that big of a challenge anymore if we move to some sort of a all contracts are going to get now priced in gold as the unit of account.
Absolutely. And so we can pay off the treasuries and all of those and have a massively inflated dollar supply, but the denominator has been moved over to gold, and we have a good supply of gold to prepare us for that. And as I was thinking about this, I also thought back to the global financial crisis of 2009. And there's a lot of talk about a property bubble going into that crisis, but um, a lot of that crisis was actually about commercial paper too, and commercial paper being short-term loans that are made to various countries around the world, and a squeeze that occurred in the commercial paper market. And it's so very interesting that crypto happened right around then. Or I should say Bitcoin happened in October the 1st of 2000, October 31st of 2009. When the commercial paper short squeeze occurred in 2 or 3 weeks earlier.
Let me try to understand where you're going with this. Is that I mean, because we've talked about how long it took to develop Bitcoin. I mean, this was not a project that was done in a weekend overnight. This was something that likely happened via a team over a period of years. Like, you're saying they launched it to coincide because they saw this crisis coming down the pipe, or what?
I just find it I find no, I one we had seen a lot of talk and movement. I mean, even from PayPal towards digital currencies leading into that crisis, and yet things were just fine. People didn't question the system. So and remember also that Bitcoin had been launched prior to the crash of Lehman Brothers, and the white paper dropped shortly thereafter. So I just find it interesting to look at the growth of crypto and the possibility of crypto and how that plays in this system. Because I also think about some of the banking rules that have been written into Basel III, and with Basel III, gold has been moved to a tier one asset alongside of U.S. Treasuries and the U.S. dollar. And meanwhile, I mean, yesterday the United States created a strategic crypto reserve, and I don't know the details, but I wonder, does a strategic crypto reserve like meet some of the tier two asset requirements? Because you can begin to see them
Well,
being.
come on, not XRP. No, not everything that's being discussed there. Like,
I
come
mean,
on, not
I
XRP.
well, there's people buy land in a floodplain. It's not all prime real estate. So,
uh, we liken XRP to buying land in a floodplain.
so well, and I'm really just thinking off the cuff here, but there have been big movements in the ecosystem of how we look at money and what are possible assets, um, and and cryptocurrency, I should say cryptocurrencies are interesting because I think what Chia and Permuto Capital are doing with regards of using blockchain for tokenization of assets and settlement of those assets is interesting. But the narrative of the likes of XRP and Bitcoin, which claim to be digital gold and maybe digital silver or digital floodplain real estate, are somewhat different narratives about what their use case is. So
Well, that's always been the head scratcher that people have been remarking on when it came to these types of assets being a strategic asset for the United States. Why would you hold Bitcoin? Why would you hold XRP? Why would you hold any of these things? You have the world's best currency of all time. You have the dollar. Everybody wants it. Everybody trades in it. The only way that would any of that would make sense is if that is the Titanic, that's the sinking ship, and everybody's about to jump ship, and you need to be in other assets because that's what the world's going to be trading in. Is that
so? And well, there was also, I guess I also thought this was interesting because it seemed to me that there was some pandering about, like, will it be Bitcoin, and Bitcoin holders are upset that it's a basket of cryptocurrencies. I wasn't surprised it was a basket of cryptocurrencies. I didn't necessarily understand like why strategic reserve worked whenever it didn't do anything about the ability to inflate the amount of paper that was traded on top of it. So, but that also seemed to me that the narrative of cryptocurrency was being courted by our government, by other governments like El Salvador. And I had to wonder, I said, like, are they talking about buying Bitcoin while they're buying gold? Is everybody, does everybody have their idea on adding to their gold reserves, and they're waiting for the announcement that the world that gold is distributed enough amongst the countries of the world again that we're going to turn back to a gold standard, and maybe instead of silver or some other precious metal, that maybe there will be a race between cryptocurrencies to see who supplies that alternative settlement of account. So,
well, it sure looks pretty distributed to me amongst the top players in the world. The only one that's like shockingly there is that Poland is so high. I guess I wouldn't have expected to see that, but here we are.
and I guess and maybe one more thing that I'll add to is that the United States is also in a real bind in a response to the creation of the BRICS payment rails and the BRICS system. And it's interesting to see a pivot in the relationship between the United States and Russia in order, to realize that we can't tell other countries what to do. Maybe making agreement, trying the carrot instead of the stick is the way forward. And we might be doing that more broadly with the World Bank and the IMF system, and saying, well, we're going to turn to gold. Everybody's holding gold, and the World Bank might be the serve in some capacity for the verification and the broadcasting or the communication as to what the verified reserves of these various countries are, because that would be a vast improvement in the gold standard system of leading into the Great Depression and some of the problems that were created there. So and I guess I say the United States is hard pressed. Donald Trump says we're going to punish countries that are using the BRICS system, but these payment systems are essentially communication systems and secure communication systems. And if I own Telegram and I want you to use Telegram, and I say, Grant, if I catch you sending a message on Signal, I'm going to raise your weekly rate or your monthly rate for using Telegram. What's that going to do? You're never going to use Telegram again. And so this is the bind that the United States is in whenever it talks about forcing other countries to continue to use the World Bank, the IMF, the SWIFT payment system for their settlement of accounts. And so turning to gold provides them some very interesting solutions in devaluing the dollar and also attracting the various nations of the world to using a system that isn't just set up on commodity swaps between various countries. So I think that's all I got.
Well, let's keep an eye on it. I've definitely been watching gold go up. If you want to follow an account on Twitter of somebody who has been pounding the drum of gold forever. Peter Schiff is one that I still keep an eye on. He's been arguing with the Bitcoin guys forever. They have a long running feud of what is going to be the settlement account, what is going to be the unit of the world. It seems like we almost have an answer here, given the way that crypto market is swinging down and gold stubbornly refuses to go the same direction as everything else. We've got one more of your favorites. What's your favorite gold guy to look at, Lucas? You might be muted.
Bummer, I am muted. I'll re-say it. So absolutely, King Kong 9888. He is a gold trader, I believe, from Hong Kong, and it was I love some of his central banking comments, and that's how I found him, I think, through Kathleen Tyson, who's also phenomenal. But Eric Young was one of the first people that I saw that was commenting on the flows out of the LBMA, and anyway, a great account to follow, and and Peter Schiff.
Yeah,
If
I wouldn't say follow Peter Schiff personally. I just watch Peter Schiff because I think it's hilarious, the fact that he's arguing all the time with the Bitcoin folks, and they are always at each other's throats about what is the best currency. And he's gotten taken to the cleaners in the last few years, because if you'd invested in gold when he told you to versus investing in Bitcoin, you definitely got lost out on a tremendous amount of gains of what's happened in Bitcoin. But maybe this is starting to be the trend of some of them Bitcoin earnings getting flipped into gold, and then we really see some rip going on in gold. Who knows?
Well, I do really like that Peter Schiff has always been a gentleman and with a sense of humor about some of the Bitcoin maximalists. And I know his son is into Bitcoin, so but I just as a supposed former Bitcoin maximalist myself, there was a time whenever I thought Peter was so very wrong, and here I am eating crow. But
no, hold on. I'm still going to say this. If you had listened to Peter Schiff for years and years and years, you'd have gotten killed compared to investing in Bitcoin. Bitcoin has been the premier asset of all assets that you could have invested in. It's just a question of, is it going to maintain that? A lot of people are still saying Bitcoin is headed to 500,000, 700,000 per coin. Who knows what actually could occur in the future? Nobody knows. If anybody knew, they'd already be rich and control the world. So nobody can predict the future, including us. But if you had listened to Peter Schiff back when these arguments were heated, he definitely was wrong. Now, if those arguments are starting again fresh from today, we'll have to see who's right and who's wrong in the longer term. I still think that there's a lot of the world that is turning towards Bitcoin. The thing is it's turning out that, just as we had bimetallism in the past with gold and silver, I think Bitcoin has taken its seat at the table. I don't think Bitcoin is going anywhere.
Okay, we'll see about that. But well over time, good talk today, and we'll see what happens with the denominator of the world. Will it still be the dollar? Will it be gold? I think we're going to find this news out very soon.
Right.
Which just to add one more thing on top of that, tomorrow or Tuesday,
very soon.
Yeah, sorry, Tuesday, March the 4th, the tariffs go into effect with Canada, and Trump has said that he had economic news of grand importance coming. So we'll see what that is. But yep, I'm sure we'll cover it more. Good talk today.
All right. See ya.